So we are going to hear from Dr. Iain Soutar today on this topic of inevitable and engaging energy system digitalisation in the UK. Iain is based at University of Exeter, where I also am, and has a long-standing research and publication in this area of energy and system transformation in particular. Sorry, my cat's just come in. I found that just really clapped her tail. And sorry, sorry me. Yeah, and research is particularly focused on energy system transformation and looking at that intersection between social and technological innovation in particular. So I won't spend any more time talking about my cat, and I instead hand over to Iain for what I'm sure will be a really engaging and excellent talk. Thanks, Iain.
Thanks very much, Kat. Thanks for the lovely introduction. And yes, hi again to everyone. It was a fire alarm at my end last month, so I'm very glad to be able to reschedule this. Yeah, so this is a talk on energy system digitalisation and drawing on a few projects I've been involved in. I think, as Kat was saying, my background is in well, thinking really about the role of people in energy system change. So, way back at the start of my career, my PhD was on community energy, and I was thinking about that in terms of a kind of combination of technological and social innovation. And then I've spent the decade or so since then thinking about the ways in which innovation is governed, and that has often taken me back to think about the ways in which people play roles, and increasingly that seems to be focused on digitalisation as a kind of key aspect of energy system change in the UK and elsewhere. So today I'll just give a brief introduction to some of the relevant projects that I'm drawing on here. I'll introduce some of my own and some of my colleagues' definitions of digitalisation, but also of this thing that we're calling smart local energy systems as a lens through which we might try and understand digitalisation. And then I want to get onto kind of three emerging issues, three presumptions that are being made by actors, particularly in the industry and policy space around digitalisation, and use them as foundations, as provocations for us as social scientists and geographers to think about digitalisation in useful ways, and hopefully we'll have time for discussion as well. So I don't want to go any further without mentioning projects and people. A lot of this work draws on the work that we did within the project called Energy Rev, which was a 4-year research programme focused on smart local energy systems, and that took place alongside something called the Prospering from the Energy Revolution innovation programme. So the former was a kind of research programme involving lots of universities up and down the UK, and then the latter, the PFER programme, was a demonstration and design project. So really an innovation programme. So there's kind of two aspects of that. There's the academic and then the industry side of that smart local energy system project. So Patrick Devine-Wright was leading work within Exeter on user and community engagement in smart local energy systems, and it's under Patrick I did a lot of that work. And then the second project was with a colleague, Emily Judson, who did her PhD here at Exeter and has now gone on to work for an organisation called Icebreaker One, which is right at the kind of proverbial coalface, working on issues around energy system digitalisation in particular. So the work kind of draws on our collective work, Patrick, Emily, and my own, as well as a wider set of colleagues from those projects. So what is this thing that we're calling energy system digitalisation? So a few attempts here to try and pin down what we're meaning here. So this is from Emily's paper, Increased Use of Digital and Data-Based Technology. So this is very much about the kind of technological diffusion within an energy system. This kind of broader, I suppose, definition by Rhodes, which is looking at, yes, technologies, incorporation of digital systems of technologies, including things like ICT, so perhaps non-material aspects of systems, but also, importantly, new business models and perhaps, value propositions, opportunities to do things differently. So perhaps expanding out from the technological into the socio-technical. And then perhaps more recently from Bayes and Ofgem, this definition, which is really about the changing nature of the sector. So the transformation of a business or industry by using digital technologies to improve its processes. So this is really about enhancing processes within businesses or industry within the energy sector. So I think useful to think about, all of these definitions are useful. I think we, for the purposes of this talk, yes, we're interested in technology, but also the kind of social and organizational aspects, but also by extension, the implications for wider sectors, so the energy industry in particular. And so these are just another few ways of trying to capture digitalization in different ways. So again, this is a figure from Emily Judson's work on the left here, bringing together the kind of technical aspect of things, both kind of material and non-material, the physical bits that we can touch, as well as kind of data and analytical capacity, analytical abilities. And then at the center of that nested set of circles is connectivity, right? It's the things that bring these technologies and capabilities together. So again, I think, for the purposes of kind of social science analysis, it's useful to try and think about the multiple dimensions that digital innovation bring to the fore and present some challenges in terms of understanding what it is, what it can do, where the challenges are thrown up. And on the right here is a figure from Innovate UK from a few years ago, trying to capture in a kind of in a figurative sense what a smart local energy system is here. And there's lots and lots of figures like this about, but it's really about increased connectivity. So we have a bunch of generation technologies here. We have something at the center, so a kind of town or some kind of conurbation at the center here, but that's connected to heat, to generation, to end-use technologies, and importantly to kind of data assets as well, so things like data centers. So this idea of being connected through data is becoming as important as being connected to energy, traditional energy networks, electricity and gas networks. And so we'll all be used to seeing, I think, figures like the right-hand one attempts to, conceptualize these new energy systems as being about, yes, energy, but also increasingly about data. So another way in which I think it's useful to think about digitalization is as this kind of notional mega trend, right? So digitalization is something that's happening outside of the energy system, happening out there, and perhaps having an impact across all sectors, whether it's retail or banking or media. And there's something about that trend being inevitable, right? It's happening outside of a system, happening outside of domestic economies, and it's existing in a way that needs to be attended to. So there perhaps is some sense that we can steer digitalisation, but certainly within a lot of the discourse, digitalisation is happening out there as a trend to be managed rather than something that can be steered with any kind of meaningful agency. Digitalization's, of course, frequently been discussed in association with these other 2Ds. So a few years ago, lots of people were talking about the 3Ds of energy system change. So digitalization, decarbonisation, and decentralization. Three things that are happening that are causing profound change in the energy system, and which are forcing actors to try and respond and to tap into the opportunities that these phenomena present. So this figure on the right here is from Emily's work again, and this just highlights that datafication was regarded as a key factor shaping energy system change among the energy industry at least in 2020. So the largest bubble there was datafication, and then some other things seem to be shaping energy systems. Of course, we've got decarbonisation there and decentralisation. And then at the top right, we've got cross-sector linkages. So this idea that energy systems are increasingly linked. We have electricity being increasingly connected up to heat systems and transport systems, and so on. I think the important part of this for me is that these 3 or 4 bubbles are explicitly connected, right? We can't think of decentralization without thinking about decarbonisation. We can't think about decarbonisation without thinking about digitalisation, and so on. And so we can think in some useful ways about digitalisation as an example of a discontinuity. So as an example of discontinuous technological change. So something that's exerting pressure on the existing system, exerting pressure on system incumbents, and which is doing at least 2 things. It's providing opportunities for new entrants into the system. So startups developing new pieces of kit or new algorithms or new front ends for apps, and so on. But also incumbents who are, through this process of creative accumulation, are acquiring new knowledge and capabilities. And often that's through mergers and acquisitions, bringing in these digital startups. But sometimes it's from kind of upskilling in the house. So we're seeing quite a lot of change within the energy system and with incumbent energy system actors in particular, in terms of kind of business as usual. What does operating an energy company look like, particularly in the retail space? So I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on, but I think useful just to think about that force, that process of digitalization as exerting some kind of pressure on system actors. And I think recently we've seen this this process of digitalization becoming increasingly embedded within UK energy policy. So 2 key things happening here. We have, again, the electrification of heat and power, so increasing cross-sector linkages, the need to decarbonise heat and transport in particular, and the sense that electrification is a useful way to do so. And then secondly, the need for more flexibility in the system. So using low carbon electricity when it's available, and the kind of increased demand for more flexible use of that low carbon electricity when it's available. So lots and lots of things happening in the policy space. And so again, these are just from the UK, but I expect there are examples from elsewhere as well. So we have things like smart meter rollout. We have attempts to try and create more smartness within electrical appliances, so washing machines, tumble dryers, and so on, that can tap into those opportunities for flexibility. We have potentially some changes within the regulatory world, so a move to market-wide half-hourly settlement, so attempt to create a more granular data infrastructure upon which we can access some benefits. And then the kind of development of standards off the back of these things. So things like the smart, secure electricity systems work. So I've just kind of cherry picked a few here, but suffice to say, there's a lot going on within the UK energy policy world, which is explicitly or implicitly to do with digitalisation. And we now have a target for clean power by 2030 under the current government, which is, I think, creating additional impetus for these projects. It's making these projects increasingly important. Finally, on kind of digitalisation, I think we're in a place now where smartness, where digitalisation is seen not just something that's important to get us to a decarbonised energy system, but something that has economic opportunities hanging off of it. And so this figure is from a UKRI, UK Research and Innovation website, off the back of the 2017 industrial strategy in the UK. In which smart local energy systems were identified as a so-called challenge area. So alongside other things, industrial decarbonisation, smart sustainable plastics, and so on. So this thing, smart local energy systems, were identified as something that had real kind of economic opportunities and which provided a focal point for a program of innovation. And the kind of rationale for this is captured in this quote by Innovate UK, that there was a need to prove that smarter local energy systems can deliver cleaner and cheaper energy services. So this was kind of an assumption that was being tested within this innovation program. And then this other quote from the government within the industrial strategy is, we want UK businesses to lead the development of new markets in areas such as smart energy systems. So again, this idea that there's an economic imperative to pushing forward on the opportunities of energy system digitalisation. So this was the kind of context behind the prospering from the energy revolution challenge that I kind of introduced in my opening slides. So smart local energy systems, this is a figure from Regen. Again, an attempt to try and kind of characterize what smart local energy systems are, or at least can be. And again, like all good concepts, there's lots of different definitions to try and pick these things apart. This is one by Callum Ray. So smart local energy systems being projects that implement integrated or systems type solutions across supply, distribution and demand. So these are super broad, right? These are about trying to address challenges across heat, transport and power, electricity, are explicitly about the systems nature of things and explicitly about connectivity. And then a definition that we generated out of a paper that we wrote on the same subject, and we're kind of emphasizing the role of place here, that they're tailored to those places, and there's about some articulation of local challenges. So this kind of figure on the right captures those definitions quite nicely and kind of emphasizes the role of the local elements, the role of energy system elements in red there, and then importantly, the emphasis on smart. Okay, so in order to access the benefits of a more connected system, we need these smart elements, whether these are about data collection or analysis or something else. And what we found in that work was that smart local energy systems are super broad, right? They're as long as they're tailored, place-based, and do something across power, transport, and heat, they can be made up of all kinds of different combinations of technologies. They can operate across different scales, involve different groups of stakeholders, and so on. But there are some kind of common elements that do hold them together. So it's through this kind of lens of smart local energy systems that we've been looking at the kind of the processes and outcomes of digitalisation. So it's within that fairly kind of narrow context, I think, that that my research has been focused. So I have a few kind of presumptions here, and I'm going to present them in turn, and we can perhaps use these as a foundation for discussion. But the first is that there's this kind of normativity behind digitalisation, that digitalisation is, well, is inevitable, but is also going to be good for society. So these are just a few select quotes from a recent report by the UK government. So this report is focused on how to get to this target of clean power by 2030. And digitalisation and smartness kind of features right through that document, interestingly. So I won't read these all in detail, but there's just some things that I've highlighted in here, that Clean Power 2030 is really about realising this ambition of a clean, contemporary, digitalised energy system, and that will be based on electricity. The idea that digitalisation has had a positive impact on transforming other systems, other sectors, and that the energy system, by extension, will also be impacted, and that those impacts will be positive. Again, lessons from other sectors that digitalisation can be good for consumers, right? So digitalisation isn't just about improving our chances to get to net zero, but they can, for example, increase consumer choice. They can bring costs down for people. They can underpin consumer-friendly products and services. Okay, so these are kind of good news stories from other sectors, whether that's kind of retail or media or banking or whatever. That digitalisation is a force for good, and it's natural and even inevitable that the energy system should embrace digitalisation as well. This fourth quote is quite interesting, I think, in that there's an emphasis here on, well, previously an emphasis on the kind of inevitability of digitalisation and it being good for consumers, but also that engagement will be entirely voluntary. So this will be market-led, led by consumers, and that the kind of benefits will be there for people to access if they choose to do so. And importantly, this shouldn't be a choice just given to the most informed consumers, but to all. So this is an attempt, I think, to create this narrative that digitalisation will work for everyone. So this isn't just about privileging the most able or the most willing consumers. So I think this that previous report didn't kind of that was just the government report. Now I don't want to kind of misrepresent the kind of wider energy industry. But I think, from wider reading, it's clear that the process, the phenomenon of digitalisation is largely being driven by policy and industry actors, and the kind of logics, the kind of rationales that I highlighted in that previous slide are quite kind of common. That digitalisation is useful, is inevitable, and is kind of progressive. It's going to allow us to do things that we haven't been able to do before. But we know from previous work on previous processes of socio-technical innovation that there's the potential for incumbent interests to shape pathways of change. So this quote from Andy Stirling: "Ideas and hopes about possible pathways for change, as well as the notions of the transition itself, can be deeply constituted by incumbent interests." So the fact that digitalisation is being shaped by policy and industry actors presents us with a set of challenges, I think, as engaged critical social scientists. How do we usefully engage critically with digital energy futures if digitalisation is being presented as something that is kind of inevitable, that is positive, that is progressive, and so forth. So lots of kind of tensions here between what's being written, what's being spoken about digitalisation within a few kind of parts of the energy sector, and what we might think of as being challenging, problematic as social scientists. So this is a piece of work again from Emily Judson that tries to pick apart some of the tensions between industry and policy-led characterizations of digitalisation with some of the kind of other work on normative directions within energy transitions. And in particular, this focused on this concept of energy democracy. So this was using Iain Soutar's concept of conceptualization of energy democracy as being about popular sovereignty, participatory governance, and civic ownership. And what we did in this paper was we looked at the degree to which digitalization adheres to or stresses those different dimensions of energy democracy. And the paper kind of threw up several challenges, I think, to this concept of energy democracy, and started to pull it apart in ways that I think are starting to, be realized as time goes on. So this paper was back in 2022 when we had some idea of what digitalization looks like. The paper kind of highlights that popular sovereignty may be further enabled, but it may also be constrained with digitalization. So it might be that we expand agency among some actors, we give some people more roles and responsibilities, but it might also be that we're excluding agency among others. Digitalization brings with it a set of specialist skills, brings with it this new kind of data infrastructure, and those two things mean that this ideal of participatory governance might be challenged in the future. And then finally, if we think about civic ownership as one aspect of energy democracy, it could be that energy system digitalization further complicates that. So who gets to extract value from the datafication of energy? Is it those who own the physical assets? Is it those who own data or algorithms and so on? So I think this was a kind of early look at what digitalization can do to energy democracy, and I think this paper is only a few years old, but I think already we're seeing digitalisation play out in different ways. So it might be that we need to revisit this paper with a look at contemporary trends within digitalisation and see what it is doing. So that brings me to the second presumption, and this is about mainstreaming digital technologies and associated business model innovations. So digitalisation is, of course, a kind of process. We can think about it as a process of rolling out technologies, but also business model innovations, tariffs, and so on. But also perhaps behavioural changes, so the ways in which people buy and set up smart appliances, whether it's, again, tumble dryers or washing machines. And also the ways in which people are giving up consent for data, allowing their data to be used by their energy suppliers, and so on. So there are lots of assumptions that are being made under the umbrella of digitalisation that are about the degree to which people can be able to and be willing to adopt both technologies and kind of behavioural aspects. This is a figure from a recent NESO document. So this is the UK's energy system operator, and this was work for the government to try and understand how to get to a clean power system by 2030. And I've picked this figure in particular because it highlights the degree of digitalisation enabled flexibility that is assumed to be playing a role by 2030. So this is only 5 years away. So a bunch of things within this scenario: huge ramping up of things like smart charging of electric vehicles, big ramping up of uptake of vehicle to grid technologies, and then some other things like using rooms for thermal storage. And there's an assumption that this stuff is just going to happen, right? It's going to underpin our ability to get to clean power by 2030 and by extension net zero by 2050. There's an assumption within there that some of that flexibility is expected to be automated, right? We can expect some of this to be outside perhaps of the agency of consumers, and taken care of by algorithms, so people don't have to meddle with their controls. But even that automated technology will require people to adopt and participate, so opt in to automation. So lots and lots of assumptions being made about our ability to, well, first of all, our ability, I think, to get to clean power by 2030, but by extension, our ability to deliver upon our flexibility goals, certainly the flexibility goals of the system operator, and by extension, government policy. There are also, of course, big questions about what mainstreaming of digital technology looks like. So what does the process, and what do the outcomes look like for different households? So some really important work by Powells and Fell to look at the willingness and ability of households to be flexible, and in this paper they highlight that households vary quite a lot in their ability to offer up flexibility to systems, their ability to afford things like electric vehicles and to opt into vehicle to grid charging, and so on. And that has real implications for the social outcomes of energy system change. Okay, so limiting participation to the most willing and able does have the potential, I think, to exacerbate existing inequalities, and it's something that I think we really need to pay attention to. So I think this raises some really pertinent questions for us as critical social scientists, for example, what do fair processes and outcomes of energy system digitalisation actually look like? What does fairness look like in the eyes of householders who may or may not have the ability or the willingness to adopt digital technologies and participate in new value propositions? And then by extension, how do we manage this? Okay, so how do we regulate for fair outcomes, particularly if we're expecting digitalisation to be market-led, to be led by consumer choice? How do we ensure that we have fairness, particularly if we are pushing the envelope in terms of the speed at which we're moving to a new digitalised energy system? So this is a piece of work I just wanted to highlight that came out of our work on smart local energy systems, in which we carried out a national survey representative of the UK adult population, so 3,000 and something responses, in which we were examining public support for a range of things related to smart local energy systems. And this bit I'm presenting here just now is focused on support for specific smart innovations. And what we found is that public support is generally higher for the most familiar smart innovations. So that's, I suppose, to be expected. People are generally more supportive of things that they have heard of or they know about, or perhaps they have seen in friends and families' houses. So things like electric heating systems, in-home batteries, smart meters, we see generally kind of higher support for these kinds of more familiar technologies. And then at the top end of this chart, rather less support for innovations that are less mature. So opportunities to buy and sell electricity, using electric cars to help local energy systems, electric vehicle leasing programs, and so on. So these are things that enjoyed less support. And I think some of this is about familiarity, but some of this might also be about innovations that have more or less immediate or obvious private benefits. So the ways in which these questions were framed at the bottom end of this chart were really about private benefits using in-home batteries and so on, whereas those at the top were really about kind of system benefits using electric vehicle leasing programs, buying and selling electricity with neighbours, and so on. So there's a few kind of dynamics going on in here. We weren't able to tease apart all of the different reasons for support or opposition to specific technologies at a really granular level. But I think important to highlight that some of the assumptions that are being made around digitalisation more generally need to be kind of interrogated with some of this on the ground research of the kind that we did a few years ago. We found several explanatory variables for support for smart local energy system innovations. And these are things that we see across other kind of low carbon technologies as well. So climate concern being far and away the most important factor, but also enthusiasm for new technologies, age and level of education. So there's a few factors that we can point to that indicate higher levels of support for digital innovations, and consequently potential challenges for engaging other parts of the population. So those who perhaps are less concerned about climate change, those who are less bothered about new technologies, new gadgets in their house. Interestingly, we found that already owning smart technology was negatively associated with support for smart innovations. So in other words, people that already had electric vehicles, smart meters, smart heating in their homes were less likely to support smart local energy system innovations. And we were a bit confused by this. I mean, there are a few explanations here. First adopters may be driven by individualistic rather than system motives. It might be that they're more interested in doing things for themselves than for their local community. So that's one potential reason. But it might also just be that system propositions, so selling electricity to neighbours and so on, may just be too immature for people to express support or opposition to. So again, there's some complex dynamics going on in here that we weren't able to draw out in the paper, but I think demands further investigation. One other thing we asked in this survey was, what does local energy mean to you? So when you see the phrase local energy, what immediate thoughts or ideas come to mind? And just with an eye on time, I'm not going to spend too long on this, but we had three kind of key themes. One on proximity. So local energy for most people meant something that was local. Okay, so no surprise there. We had a big group of people who just were scratching their heads and they actually had no view or weren't confident enough to venture an opinion as to what local energy might mean. And then we had a fairly large theme which focused on generation, essentially. So wind and solar generation primarily. So turbines, being able to see solar PV panels, these being kind of locally sited and so on. What we didn't see, interestingly, is any mention really of smart or digital. So bear in mind this data is from 2021, but we saw no mention of any kind of idea that local energy means anything to do with smart or digital as an obvious aspect of local energy. So maybe that people just don't associate smart elements with local energy. And I think this, for us was quite kind of telling, purely because smart local energy systems for industry and for policymakers is explicitly about digitally connected systems. So there's some disconnect there, at least according to this data set, between what industry and policymakers think local energy systems can and should be compared to what the public thinks local energy systems are. And I think this was brought to bear in one of the projects within the P4 programme. So this is Project Leo, which is in Oxfordshire, which really kind of went to town in trying to understand how people understand flexibility. So this quote from a Energy Rev interview participant: all people want to know is what does smart energy technology mean for me? So is it going to inconvenience me? Is it going to benefit me? So they kind of understand after a while what smart local energy systems are, but they really want to know what does it mean for me and my household. Project Leo in particular spent a lot of time trying to understand how to communicate this concept of flexibility to householders, and really lent into the challenge of community engagement. So this image on the right here is from an event which was trying to explain the concept of electricity system flexibility using beer. So it is on a YouTube video if you want to have a look at that. But really kind of interesting example of trying to introduce and discuss what is quite a kind of techie complex concept to members of the public who perhaps don't think about energy system flexibility in the same way that some of the rest of us do. And I think some of this work is becoming more well, I'm not going to say embedded, but is becoming more visible within UK policy, or at least advice to UK policy. So this is an excerpt from the Climate Change Committee's 7th Carbon Budget from just a few months ago, highlighting again that public engagement is going to be a key enabler here to build people and businesses understanding and confidence in low carbon technologies, goods and services. So heartening, I think, for me to see that public engagement's being given some attention. I would have liked to have seen it in section 2 or 3 rather than section 5.2.3, but we'll see how that goes as the next carbon budgets come out. And then our final presumption here is around the kind of anti-politics of digitalisation. And this is something that came out of our interviews with Smart Local Energy System project partners, which was the assumption or the suggestion that digitalisation, digital innovation can or should even take place without engaging people or communities. So this really aligns with kind of traditional characterizations of that people or households are passive, uninterested energy system actors. They're just consumers, and we should be creating systems for them to kind of benefit from. And I think this is interesting in that it situates digitalisation as kind of anti-political. It kind of eliminates potentially the opportunity or the need for political participation, debate or contestation around digitalisation. If we assume that people don't care and don't want to be engaged, then perhaps we start to design digital energy systems that enable further disengagement. And this, of course, raises questions for us again as social scientists about the ways in which digitalisation has implications for energy justice, democracy, inclusion, fairness, and so on. So this quote from one of the project partners with Energy Rev is quite telling. I think sometimes the best answer would be to allow people to be completely disengaged. Can we as an industry make it that people need to engage less, but we can achieve the same, we can achieve the right outcome? So I think this is at odds with what many of us as kind of critical social scientists would think of as useful ways of engaging the public around energy system change and around technologies more specifically. So I'll wrap things up there. I mean, I think, on reflection, we are in this world where energy system digitalisation is inevitable. I think, we are going to see a creeping digitalisation within energy systems. I think the degree to which it will be transformational is far from settled, and there's lots up for grabs. I think there is still a misalignment between the acknowledged system benefits of digitalisation and the social or private benefits. And that takes us to this kind of urgent need to try and reconcile these two things and to bring together, I think, policy, industry communities, as well as communities that are working more directly with the public, perhaps. And then finally, I think there's this need as much as ever for critical engagement with digitalisation. I think it's arguably as important as ever, particularly as we're moving into this phase of accelerated change with clean power by 2030 on the horizon. So I'll finish up there. Welcome any questions, comments, challenges. Yeah, thank you.
That was great. Thanks so much, Iain. Never get to the clapping thing quick enough on my reactions. That was really fantastic. So yes, you can post your questions. There's on this the Teams webinar function. You can either post in the chat or you can post in the Q&A, and Amy and I will keep an eye on those. We can either read them out for you, or you're very welcome to turn your mic on. I think you can turn the mics on. Is that right, Amy? And ask your question yourself. Well, turn on if you want to. Otherwise, I'll read them out. So we've already got one question in the chat. And Amy can keep an eye on the Q&A. Maybe I'll keep an eye on the chat. Okay, great. I have lots of questions. I don't think I'm going to have time to ask them, but so Catherine Queen is asking, she says, thanks, Iain. Some very interesting ideas around intentional disengagement from digitalisation. It would be great to have further conversations around this. Yeah. So I guess it's, yeah, so yeah, she's just saying she has to go at 3. But yeah, so I guess a call out for more conversation around disengagement and digitalisation. And I know Catherine, I don't know if you obviously know Catherine is you know, particularly interested in public disengagement and what that means. Okay. I don't know if you had any response or anything more you want to say on public and disengagement.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that I think that, again, the clean power by 2030 target is going to stress our ability to think meaningfully about engagement, because we all know that meaningful engagement takes time and effort and resources. And I think there could be a tendency within some to think that intentional disengagement is useful. You know, it's a kind of pragmatic necessity. And so this kind of goes beyond digitalization, I think, to think about, you know, engaging communities around new wind projects and infrastructure and so on. So how do we reconcile the kind of the need for acceleration with the need for a just transition? I think it's, you know, it's a live debate, and I don't have any firm answers to, but I do think there are, you know, interesting lessons from digitalization, as well as, you know, as you know, onshore wind in particular. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I could have a longer conversation about that as well. I think it's you know, who are we engaging with, and who slows things down and who speeds things up as well. I think there's probably so another question from Tina Fawcett. Thanks, Tina. Did you want to ask it, or I'll go ahead, save time. Tina asks, have you got any views on how the locational pricing debates and decisions might impact on how people think about local energy systems? So everything that's in the news at the moment about zonal pricing, I think, is what she's.
Well, I don't have any fully formed views. I mean, certainly, I think there's clearly quite a lot of discussion and debate within the industry about what locational pricing could and should look like. And I think, you know, my perception is that is relatively behind. That those conversations are relatively behind closed doors, right? It's within a kind of relatively small set of actors, rather than being discussed, you know, in a kind of wider forum. And I understand that, you know, why that is the case. You know, it's a very complex set of decisions that can be made. There's various ways in which you can think about locational pricing, and I think the implications for bills and for households and businesses are very much up in the air. So, yeah, there's a question there about when and how you bring people into these discussions. And again, I don't have any firm answer. I'd be interested if you do, Tina. But yeah, it feels like yeah, it certainly feels like a set of discussions that are being held kind of quite closely within industry, rather than you know, it kind of is being fed out into the kind of media cycle now and again. But yeah, be interested in anyone else's thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be using my position as chair just to ask the final question. We've just about got time for. I was just really interested in all the things that you said about kind of mainstreaming, but also this idea of digitalisation as just this kind of force that's being exerted, and there's no way of stopping it. We just have to kind of, you know, sort of steer it in some kind of direction. And I was just I was thinking about, we know within digitalisation more broadly that it has marginalised people. So that we know this is already happening. And I just wondered if those kind of processes of marginalisation, which you touched on, and which I think are inevitable, if they are being considered and thought about from any of the work that you've done in these processes of digitalisation of energy.
I think certainly there is an acknowledgement, certainly within academia, but also within industry and regulation, that there could be some negative consequences of digitalisation, right? It's seen as, I think we aren't blind to the potential for things to go awry. And there is some, there is some interesting work by various organisations to try and to get a handle on what the issues are and to try and perhaps create circumstances in which you can innovate towards net zero, but also towards kind of energy justice outcomes. So, but as far as I can see, these are fairly kind of isolated attempts to manage the problem rather than think about digitalisation in the round. So, I mean, the kind of the Clean Power 2030 document is quite kind of sweeping in many ways, and it has to be. I think I would like to see much more attention on the kind of negative consequences. I mean, you can potentially see, I think, an outcome of digitalisation that is increasingly unjust, and which creates unfairness across multiple parts of the system, which then will have it could have a negative impact on the transition at large. So I think we could be doing much more to confront it as an issue that is going to become more profound as we go on, rather than just try and deal with it as it emerges. But here I think this is where academia can play a really important role in thinking through these issues in a meaningful way.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll end there. Just slightly over time, sorry. Apologies, my role as chair. Thanks so much. That was just a fantastic talk to end the webinar series with, so we really appreciate it and really enjoyed it. Lots of great comments in the chat. Yeah, we'll close there. And just to say, we will make this available online, so you can rewatch the talk if you're interested to on our web pages. And it's also on our YouTube channel, which we have now started. So yeah, and just to say thanks again to Iain, and we'll close.
Great. Thanks very much, Kat. Thanks everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.